Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So, even though it says we're on Shlishi already, of course we are slowly getting through this, and we just had a blessing that Joseph that excuse me that Jacob gave Joseph's sons. So we're going to continue here. Vayar
Oh,
Yosef. Sorry, I'm going to ask you to mute, please. There's
this thing
someone who
don't
needs
work
to.
now.
Okay, Harlan, you need to mute, please. Okay, I'm going to mute you, Harlan. I'm sorry. There we go. Oh, I think you turned off your camera. Okay, there we go. All right. Vayar Yosef. Joseph saw Ki yashit aviv yad yimino, that his father was placing his right hand al rosh Ephraim, on the head of Ephraim. Vayera be'einav, and this was bad in his eyes. Joseph felt this was a bad thing. Vayitmoch yad aviv, and he took hold of his father's hand, lahasir ota, to remove it, me'al rosh Ephraim, from Ephraim's head, al rosh Menasheh, and to place it on Menasheh's head. That's what he was trying to accomplish. Okay. Vayitmoch yad aviv. So literally, tomech means to support. He supported his father's hand. So Rashi explains, Herima me al rosh beno, he lifted it up from the head of his son, v'tamcha biado, and he supported it with his hand, is what it's saying. Right. Onwards, next verse. Vayomer Yosef el aviv, and Joseph said to his father, Lo chen avi, not this, my father, not so, not so, my father. Ki zeh bachor, because this one is the firstborn. Sim yimincha al rosho, place your right hand on his head. And there's no Rashi on this. Vayima'en aviv, his father refused. Vayomer, and he said, Yadati vni, Yadati. I know, my son, I know. So lovely, right? This repetition of this Yadati. In some ways, I was thinking, in a way, it's trying to, I think, say it in a respectful way to his son. Gamhu yela'am. He too will be a nation. V'gamhu yigdal, and he too will be great, become great. V'ulam, however, achiv hakaton, his younger brother, yigdal mimanu, will be greater than him. V'zar'o, and his seed, yeh melo hagoyim, will be the fullness of nations. I'm going to do the Rashi, and then I'm going to share something with you that this prophecy, right? Jacob is uttering a prophecy. So, Yadati b'ni Yadati. I know, my son, I know, Shehu Bachor, that he is the firstborn, that Menashe is the firstborn. Gam hu yeh la'am v'gomer, he too will be a nation, etc. She'atid, and Rashi, of course, supplies us with specifics, which is just so typical and wonderful about Rashi, that these aren't just generalizations, but the idea of finding specific examples to support what's being said. She'atid Gid'on latzet mimenu, because in the future, Gideon is going to uh, come from him, come out from him, be descended from him. Shehakadosh Baruch Hu oseh nes al yodo, and that the Holy One, blessed be He, will make a miracle by His means, through him. Ve'ulam, However, Achiv Hakaton Yigdal Mimenu, quoting right from our Torah, his younger brother will be greater than him. She'atid Yehoshua Latzeit Mimenu, because in the future Joshua will be descended from him. Sheyanchil et haaretz, who will cause the land to be inherited. He's going to divide up the land of Israel. Vayilamed Torah Israel, and he is going to teach Torah to the Jewish people, right, to Israel. And this interesting little contrast here, right, that Gideon is going to perform a miracle, but look at what Joshua is doing and saying that that is actually greater than the performance of a miracle. Think about that one, right? And that he actually is going to, I mean, this is the promise, right? Joshua is actually going to deliver on the promise that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this promise, not even Moses was going to be able to do that. V'zar'o yeh melo hagoyim, and his seed will be the fullness of nations. Kol ha'olam, the entire world, yitmaleh betzeit shom'o, it will be filled as his reputation goes out. Ushmo, and his name, Keshiyamid Chama Begivon. This is Joshua, by the way, when he will cause the sun to stand still in Gibeon. Vayereach be'emech Elon, and the moon in the valley of Elon. I mean, to cause the planets, right, the sun and the moon, to stand still. That's a famous story in the book of Joshua. That's, again, what does that mean, right? Do we take it literally? Does it mean something else? Is there a deeper meaning to that? If there is a deeper meaning, I would have yet to sort of figure out what that deeper meaning might be, or to come across something which gives an explanation of that metaphor that's a satisfying one. At any rate, that's a little question that's out there. So there was something else that has occurred to me, which I spoke about last Shabbat when I was in Santa Rosa. And that when he says, when Jacob uses the term that let me find it here, right? His seed will be the fullness of nations. I'm going to give a different interpretation. We know that Ephraim represents the northern kingdom. And you know perhaps already that, of course, after the kingdom of Solomon, the under Solomon's son, the kingdom split into two parts. The 10 northern tribes, which were um, were loyal. They left David. They were no longer loyal to the house of David. And the southern kingdom, which interestingly enough consisted of basically the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, essentially. Interesting that it should be Benjamin, right, who's a descendant of Jacob, but also Joseph's full brother, that was loyal to Judah. And I feel that these stories, the story in Vayigash, where Judah basically says to Joseph, take me as your slave instead of Benjamin, is a foreshadowing of that interesting little piece. Right? And those kingdoms were split until the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom and essentially took all that population and assimilated it into the entire empire. That was their strategy to deal with conquered people, were to destroy their sense of identity. But look, that essentially means that's a fulfillment, you might say. It's a direct fulfillment of this prophecy that the descendants of Ephraim, essentially representing the northern kingdom, which is sometimes even referred to as Ephraim, is now assimilated with the rest of the world, with the nations that in the course of time and through that, because we talk about the 10 lost tribes, that in fact they are part of the rest of the world. And I feel that in a way, it's God allowing the Jewish people and the descendants of Abraham to actually be part of the world's population through blood and not simply through belief. And if that's the case, the implications of that are very great in terms of any elements of Jewish triumphalism and the need that we have to recognize that there are the seeds of the Jewish people within the nation, within the population of the world. Now, I haven't read that anywhere. It's it's just based on what I'm reading here and a choice of interpreting words of scripture. But that is what happened, at least according to the story in the Bible, and I have no reason to doubt it as far as that's concerned. But if that's the case, I think this is an incredible prophecy right here, underscoring the values that go along with understanding what happened. Because essentially it's saying we're all related, both Jew and non-Jew. We're all related, even beyond the fact that we're all descendants of Adam and Eve. And the idea of us trying to understand what it is to live with the notion of family harmony. So,
Um, doesn't it
yes,
doesn't it also underscore the concept? Well, or maybe the point that, or which is more important, right? Is it more important that we actually be part of the world, like you said? It's not only through belief but blood, which is kind of one portion of this, versus the southern tribes, right? Basically, which is the pure purity in that
right,
respect, because they weren't
right.
assimilated, and they're separatist, right? So which one? And maybe it's not either, but it kind of asks the question of which one is more important, or how do we balance those two? And maybe they're equally important, but I'm not sure what it's trying to say there. But
Right.
there's something in that.
I, I'm, I appreciate your question very much. I'm so glad you're asking it. So there are two elements to faith. One is, we have the positive commandments of what you need to do, and we have the negative commandments of what you need not to do. All right? And you could say that the positive commandments represent the love of God, and the negative commandments represent being God-fearing. Right? They totally identify that way. And I've seen a lovely comparison of a wings of a bird, that one is the right wing and one is the left wing, and without both wings, the bird isn't going to fly. And so I feel you need both. You needed the assimilation of the Jewish people, of those northern tribes of Ephraim, into the world's population to underscore just how deeply it's important for the nations of the world to recognize that they're really family, okay, and not to hurt one another, etc. But on the other hand, you also needed the southern kingdom to survive, and the reason they survived, even though they also went into exile, and they were conquered by the Babylonians, but the Babylonians had a different policy regarding conquered nations, and they felt that if they allowed each nation to maintain a certain level of self-reliance and self-government, that they could, and all they needed to do, right, that it would help them in the organization of collecting taxes, essentially, right? And not only that, but if you make people happy, they're much more likely to be productive and less likely to rebel and less likely to push against you if they have a certain level of, that they can retain a certain measure of respect and feeling that they have their own worth. And that's in fact the way the Babylonian government, if I can use that term, that was their policy, which is why the Jewish people survived, because they had actually a descendant of David who was called the Exilarch, who was like that titular ruler of the Jewish community in Babylonia. And so they also had their own self-government to some extent, as long as they were loyal to the Babylonians and collected their taxes. But the point is that we needed them, because if they had Also, if they had gotten the same treatment as the Assyrians, you would never have, to this very day, books that are incredible like the Talmud
Mm.
or the development of Jewish law and that understanding that the very heart of what it is to be a human being and the very nature of joy and self-respect and the ability to endure adversity, etc., and to recognize how worthwhile life is through the performance of mitzvot. That by performing commandments, when you perform a commandment, you are essentially doing something worthwhile. That's what that's saying. You know, I look at my own life and I look at all the times that I waste or that I even waste now, etc. I mean, I have to recognize that you can't always be, focused, 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 that you have to be able to also relax and do other things so that you can gain strength. It's all part of the package. So you needed that southern kingdom to survive because that's what developed into, I mean, in Babylonia is where they actually developed the Babylonian Talmud. They had these academies, both in subsequently or contemporaneously. There was study going on in the land of Israel and also in Babylonia. There were these great academies where they were studying, etc.
Wow.
So you needed both. You had to
Yep.
have both. The danger is when the one group starts to think they're better than the other. And I think that is a sad thing, when you don't recognize that you're privileged, and that in fact, if you recognize that you're privileged, that actually demands that you be even more humble and modest in your demeanor and your behavior. Then it puts a greater burden of responsibility on you if you're privileged, rather than simply taking advantage of those who are underprivileged, which of course is an absolute abominable behavior on the part of human beings. It's an abomination.
Well, thank you for the explanation. That
Yeah.
certainly helps. And there's a lot in there to unpack too. So thanks.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you. So we're going to go on with this. Let's go on with 20. Vayevarchem, and he blessed them. Bayomahu, on that day, saying, Lamor saying, Becha Yevarech Yisrael Lamor, through you Israel will give blessing. Lamor, in other words, quote. Dr. Pamela Barmash likes to translate the word Lamor as quote. Yisimcha Elohim, hear the words of the blessing itself, right? May God make you, place you, Ephraim Menasheh, like Ephraim and like Menashe. So, well, I'll finish the sentence. Vayasem et Ephraim lifnei Menashe, and he placed Ephraim before Menashe. So, interesting. If we play along with the interpretation that I've shared with you, then we can see Ephraim and Menashe as being these two wings, right, of the bird. And that when he's saying Ephraim, he's referring to studying Torah, performing mitzvot. And when he talks about Menashe, remember, Jacob said very clearly, they're both very important, right? And make him like Menashe, meaning God-fearing, avoiding the moving off the path. And he placed Ephraim before Menashe. Now, honestly, in some ways, I'd say, what's more important? Are the negative commandments more important than the positive commandments? And there's a part of me that would say, not doing, not committing sins, not doing things is more important than doing positive things. But I'm wondering here if there's a lesson here about the idea that if you in fact do positive things, you're less likely to do negative things, because instead of having to focus on the negative things, you can focus on the positive things and then avoid doing the negative things. And that's, in a sense, sort of a sub message of why we have both. We need both. He didn't say just Ephraim, he said Ephraim and Menashe. It's a question of studying Torah. And that's something people fall down on very, very much. And the rabbis very often talk about, there's a beautiful passage in Brachot and Tractate Brachot where they talk about, I think the way they put it, I'd want to find the actual passage, but regardless, it's very early on in Brachot. It's like in the first chapter in the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud there, that sort of basically says that God is roaring, you know, roaring out of frustration because of the neglect of Torah. And if, of course, if one looks around, of course, the Torah is being neglected. And here, Torah, I wouldn't take only as the Jewish, the Jewish part of it. I mean, I think that's important, but I think there are other expositions of the Torah that this could refer to as well. That many of these other you could be referring to the Quran or the New Testament or the Bhagavad Gita or whatever. That when these things are interpreted properly, they can lead people to having righteous lives. Anything that leads towards righteous living and that builds up the nature of human beings. So. I may be going out on a limb here, but that's the sense that I have of it. So, B'cha Yevarech Israel, through you, Israel will bless, and it's Yevarech, so it's active. It's an active sense. It's not Yevorach. Although remember, there are no points in the Torah, and if we were to read it B'cha Yevorach Yisrael, we could understand it with through you, Israel, that is Jacob, will be blessed. And I think we could, suggest that possibility. Haba levarech et banav, one who intends to bless his sons. Literally, one who comes to bless his sons. Bracha, uh, Barchem should bless them bibirchatam, through their blessing. Should bless them, his sons, through their blessing. Vayomar ish livno, and a man, literally it's saying, a man should say to his son, Esimcha Elohim, may God place you, we might say make you, ke Ephraim Menasheh, like Ephraim and like Menasheh. Vayasim et Ephraim, and he placed Ephraim bevirchato, in his blessing, that is in Jacob's blessing, or if we want to say it refers to, if Rashi is referring to the comment he just made, right, that when a person blesses his son, but you can go either way on this, it's ambiguous. Lifnei Menasheh, right? So this, I think, as I'm moving along this sentence, I think Rashi is referring to Jacob here, right? In his blessing before Menashe, lahakdimo badegalim, that he should precede him, that is, Ephraim should precede Menashe in the degalim would be the banners, okay? The Chanukat Hanesiim. So I'll explain this by banners and the dedication. Here we got the word Chanukah, right? The festival we just celebrated of the princes. What we are talking about is in the book of Numbers, where the camp is set up, and you're familiar with this because we'll be doing this the second year, but there are three tribes on each side of the tabernacle, on each cardinal point of the tabernacle. The tribe of Levi is not included because the tribe of Ephraim and Menasheh are separate tribes at this point, and Ephraim comes before he is the lead tribe of those three tribes, and they each had banners, right? And the banner of Ephraim was like over all these three tribes. Nesiim, Chanukat Nesiim, the dedication of the princes. When the tabernacle was dedicated, and this is the Torah reading for Chanukah, right? The princes, each one of the princes of the tribes, over the course of 12 days, each tribe brought a gift to dedicate the tabernacle. and they all brought the same gifts. Each one brought the same gifts, and those gifts, as Rashi interprets it out, are symbolic of the history of Israel up to that point. The various gifts they give are symbolic of various important elements of Jewish history to that point. So this is the dedication, and Ephraim comes before Menasheh in the order of princes who come and bring gifts. And let's see here. I'm going to do a little bit more. Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef, Israel, Jacob, of course, said to Joseph, Hine, behold, Anochi met, I am about to die. V'haya Elohim imachem, and God will be with you. V'heshiv etchem, and he will bring you back. He will cause you to return, El Eretz Avotechem, to the land of your patriarchs, to the land of your fathers. Va'ani, and as for me, Natati lacha Shechem achad, I have given to you, I have bequeathed to you, Shechem achad alachecha. So he's saying, actually, this is, I think, a play on words too, right? Because he's saying a portion here. He's literally, Shichmo means like his shoulders, right? So it's a shoulder above your brothers. In other words, a certain piece of territory above your brothers, because remember, Joseph is the firstborn of Rachel. Asher lakachti, which I took, miyad ha'emori, from the control. Yad means hand, but the hand is a metaphor for control, right? Under the Amorite control. Becharbi uvekashti, through my sword and through my bow. And I believe he's talking about Shechem. He's talking also, that's the play on words, that he's talking here about Shechem. But let's see what Rashi has to say here. Va'ani natati lacha, and I am giving to you, lefi she'ata toreach, right? Because you are going to the trouble, lehit asek bekfurati. This is a payment to you for the trouble you're going to have to take to be engaged in my burial. V'gam ani natati lacha nachala, and I am also giving you an inheritance, or an area, right? Shetika ber ba, in which you will be buried, in which you can be buried. Ve'ezu zo, and which is this? What place is this? Shechem. It's Shechem. Shne'emar, as it states in Joshua chapter 24, Ve'et atzmut Yosef, and the bones, the remains of Joseph, Asher he'elu b'nei Yisrael mimitzrayim, which the children of Israel brought up from Egypt, kavru b'Shechem. They buried in Shechem. Shechem echad alachecha, one Shechem over your brothers. Shechem mamash he. That is literally, it's Shechem tielacha. So I think here it means a portion. Chelek echad yetera. So this play on words on the word Shechem. Yetera al achecha, over and above your brothers. So Rashi has interpreted that verse, Becharbi uvekashti, with my sword and with my bow. Here we go. Keshehargu Shimon v'Levi et anshe Shechem, when Shimon and Levi killed the men of Shechem, nitkansu kol svivotehem lihizdaveg lahem. Let me make sure I can. Right, okay. All the surrounding people, okay, came to support them, to partner with them, with the people of Shechem. V'chagar Yaakov klei milchama kenegdan. And Jacob had to basically arm himself against them. Davar acher, a different interpretation. Shechem Echad hi habechorah. So talking about this term Shechem Echad refers to the firstborn inheritance, right? The double inheritance. Sheitlu banav, because what was happening? His sons, that's Ephraim and Menasheh, would take shnei chalakim. They would take two portions. V'shchem lashon chelek. And the term Shechem, the word Shechem, also has the meaning of a portion. Hu, chelek hu, ketargumo, as the Targum translates. V'harbe yesh lo domim b'mikra, and there are many similar examples in Scripture. So for example, he's giving Tehillim Kaf Aleph, Psalm 21, Ki tishitemu Shechem, right? You shall place him as a portion. Here we go. Tashit sonai, you shall place my enemies, those who hate me, lifnei lifanai, before me, lechalakim, into pieces, into portions. And then he gives another example in the book of Psalms, Psalm 60, achalke shchem. I will divide them into pieces, into parts. I'll divide and conquer, right? Hosea Vav, Hosea chapter 6, Derech Yitzarchu Shchema Ish Chalko. So by way, I don't know if it's Yiratzchu or Yiratzchu Shchema Ish Chalko. I'd have to look up the translation. Lauren, are you still there? Lauren?
Yes, I'm there. You can
Can you
see me.
I'm sorry, I can't because I
Yeah.
don't have the picture in front of me.
Okay.
Can you translate this for me, please?
I'm not sure which one you're doing
It's
because like
Hosea
mine says
chapter 6.
murder on the way.
Uh, hmm. No, I'm not. I
The
think
one
that's
after.
okay. This is a long Rashi, and I think we're out of time. So I'm going to put the mark here that we need to do this Rashi. Please God, next year. Let's do that. Let's do that.
So
Okay,
we
and
might
I
as
can.
we'll have to do the verse over too.
That's right. Okay,
So
so let me
we'll
go back
put it there.
there. Let me go back there. I'm sorry I
Okay.
couldn't finish it all, but
Yeah.
let's do that. Okay, very
Okay.
good.
I have to
Thank you.
go.
No, we all have to do something else at this point. Right. Okay. Let me mark that quickly here, and then I will stop the share. Okay. And stop the recording. And thank those who are with us.